Kia ora, and welcome back to We Do B2B, the podcast by Blue Ocean where we unpick the ins, outs, ups and downs of B2B marketing here in Aotearoa, New Zealand. I'm your host, Dale Kerner, and I'm a B2B marketer like you. From emerging trends in thinking to inspiring real-world stories from smart, good people here in New Zealand, we're here to help the New Zealand B2B marketing community to become one of the best and brightest anywhere in the world. If, like me, you're a B2B marketer looking for a place to connect, learn, and be inspired, you have come to the right place. Kia ora and welcome back to We Do B2B. Now, I'm going to be totally frank and say that I'm a little bit intimidated by the person sitting across from the table from me. I'm going to say we have as close to New Zealand marketing and advertising royalty as is possible on the show today. So joining us today is James Hurman, who, if you haven't come across him already, open your eyes and your ears. He's a founding partner of innovation studio Previously Unavailable, where we're shooting today, a best-selling author, 3 times over, let's say, co-founder of Tracksuit, which is rapidly changing the way that brand tracking is managed and monitored. And on top of that, in case that wasn't enough, program director of the Master of Advertising Effectiveness. So that's a hell of a CV.
Yeah, it's all a lot of fun though. So
yeah. So take us through a little bit of your journey first and foremost. How did you end up where you are and doing what you're doing?
Okay, yeah, probably long story. So dropped out of high school, didn't go to university, ended up working as like a office admin person, and the IT manager needed someone to help him fix computers. So I did 7 years in IT before I moved into advertising, which amuses most people. Yeah. And so I ended up fixing computers in an advertising agency and figured out what they were doing was a lot more interesting than what I was doing. And so managed to kind of con my way into the planning discipline in advertising, and kind of just loved that. And so sort of worked my way up through the ranks and ended up running planning departments and eventually leading an agency here in New Zealand, and then got out of that because I wanted to use, I love the strategy and creativity of the sort of process at agencies, but I wanted to sort of apply that more centrally to companies. And so I'd done a bit of that with Stolen Rum, which was the first startup that I was involved with. And that was kind of just really gratifying to be able to apply what you know to be right on your own, your own brand or your own company. And so I wanted to do more of that. So started Previously Unavailable to really be a kind of company that works with innovative people and really helps them with their product, with their experience, with their brand, all that sort of stuff. And then Previously's grown now. We're 10 years old now, and really we're kind of a venturing business. So we have a venture capital fund, we invest in startups, we work with a ton of them, we create them from time to time, and we write about them. So Caffeine, which is the kind of daily news media for the startup ecosystem here in New Zealand, we started last year. So really I think that we're, as an organization, really passionate about New Zealand becoming the best in the world at creating innovative young companies that grow into, very large global ones. And then alongside that, when I was in advertising, I became really interested in advertising and marketing effectiveness, particularly creativity and how it drives effectiveness in advertising and marketing. So I wrote a couple of books on that subject and have done a ton of research over the years, and really benefited from a kind of renaissance that we've been through in terms of, understanding how marketing really works. And so that's what I teach on the Master of Advertising Effectiveness program. It's all of those evidence-based principles that have been discovered over the last 15 or so years that really help us understand, how marketing works and how to make it work better.
What a journey. I love the piece about, being a venturing business and just the number of different threads that are on the go. You must struggle to switch off at night, but or maybe you don't, and maybe that's why it's also possible.
I sleep pretty well, wear myself out every day, and then
So what I wanted to dig into in this conversation, so if we look at some of the titles of your books, The Case for Creativity, Future Demand, I'd like to understand from your perspective how the relationship between creativity and effectiveness come to life in the B2B context. Because we know from the likes of the John Lombardos and the Peter Weinbergs of the world, all the work that they've done with the Ehrenberg Bass Institute, we know that there's an appetite to make B2B less bland. Yeah. But making the commercial case for that is not always an easy hurdle to overcome, particularly in some of your more established traditional industries. So I'm going to start with a question first and foremost, which is, when you talk about creativity, what do you mean by creativity?
Sure, yeah. It's like in marketing, we're really good at coming up with these terms like creativity that we bandy around a lot and we consider to be really important kind of ideas in the industry, but we struggle to define them. Brand is one of those. Insight is one of those.
Yeah.
Creativity is one of those.
Strategy, let's not even.
Strategy, yeah. Yeah, there's lots of these sort of nebulous concepts. But the way that I define creativity in its sort of marketing and advertising context is in sort of three ways. Firstly, doing something original, something fresh, something that hasn't been done before. It's not just sort of a repeat of best practice, but it's something really fresh and really new. Secondly, it's something that's really engaging, so ideas that pull people toward them as opposed to communicate at them. And thirdly, a high degree of executional craft quality. So, as those executional components, such as the writing and the photography and the direction and, all of that kind of stuff, is that being done in a way that really serves the idea and really kind of makes the campaign as engaging and memorable as it possibly can be. So those are three what I call creative award-winning qualities, because it's what award judges look for. And we can be skeptical about the value of awards and award judges and stuff like that, but they're the people really that kind of decide what's really creative and what's not so creative. And I think their definition is a pretty good one. Has it been done before? Is it original? Is it really engaging? Has it been produced really well?
So if we flip that around and say, well, if the award judges are, setting the criteria for what is viewed as creative, that doesn't necessarily correlate with them being effective. So what's effectiveness from your perspective? Yeah,
effectiveness is, at its simplest, it's commercial outcomes, right? So it's, have we driven an increase in sales? Have we driven an increase in market share? Have we driven an increase in profitability? Those are the three sort of most important commercial metrics. But there's kind of a path that advertising takes to get to that outcome. And it happens sort of in three stages. So the first stage is, does the work stand out? Is it engaged with? Is it noticed? Is it remembered? And cutting through the enormous clutter is kind of your first, the first thing that you've got to do, right? And so we look at metrics like, digital metrics like likes and clicks and shares and, all the earned impressions, PR impressions. If you're doing campaign tracking, like how many people have seen the campaign, noticed it, remember it, those sorts of things. And those metrics don't tell us really whether the campaign's done anything, but they do tell us that it's taken that first step of standing out and being noticed and remembered. And then the next thing a campaign needs to do is drive some kind of change in behavior or some kind of change in the way that people think about or feel about the brand. And those are kind of behavioral metrics like, loyalty kind of stuff, rate of purchase, those sorts of things, brand metrics, health, brand awareness and consideration and preference and those sorts of things. And the commercial outcomes happen because we've identified the right change in behavior or change in the way that people feel about a brand. That's what sort of ladders up to those commercial results. So that's how I think about effectiveness. Does it sort of stand out? Does it change behavior or feelings toward a brand in some way? And does that ladder up to a commercial outcome?
It's really interesting. I was talking to the team from Fisher & Paykel Healthcare. We're prepping for an event with them next week and a podcast as well. And one of the things that they've really, really lent into is actually this concept that comes out of, I suppose, the sales rhetoric, which is one of the most valuable things that you can hear is the word no. Because when you've got barriers, when you've got resistance, when you've got something to work with, you can change things.
Sure. Yeah.
So I think it's really interesting to hear your take on that piece, and the comment around work that pulls people towards rather than pushes out is so true, because you see so much which is just like you said, it's noise and it's there for the sake of it. I'd be interested to know if there are any cases or any work in the B2B realm that you actually see and know and recognize and think, shit, that's a really good piece of work for creativity and effectiveness. No pressure.
Yeah, totally. I mean, a few examples that come to mind. So one would be back in 2014, I think it was, Volvo did a piece of work selling commercial trucks, which you might remember, it was Jean-Claude Van Damme's Epic Split.
Yeah.
So, essentially a B2B campaign, because normal consumers don't tend to buy commercial trucks.
Not too often.
And massively effective, campaign. It won the Creative Effectiveness Grand Prix in Cannes in 2015. It drove the next year's sales up about 24%, which is a pretty big increase for a slow moving, large, durable like a truck. And then it continued to work. So if you look at that business's increases in market share over the past 8 or 9 years, they continue to sort of grow. And that was a very creative piece of work. So that's one I think is great. There's work that Amex did with small businesses in America. It's called, the campaign's called Small Business Saturday. So they created a special shopping day for everyone to go out and support small businesses, which was again just wildly effective in terms of driving Amex's brand and its sort of connection with that segment of the business market, and also just brought to life in a really creative way, and so that's another one that I think is really great. And then what IBM have done, I mean, they've been great marketers for decades and decades, but the work that they've done over the past sort of 15 or 20 years has been really excellent, and all off that platform of Smarter Planet, and they've done lots of really creative stuff with that, and lots of pretty kind of dry businessy stuff off it as well. But it's a really strong platform that's lasted them a really long time. So yeah, those would be my three picks.
I find it really interesting because I've asked a number of people that same question, and Jean-Claude Van Damme and the Volvo examples come up a number of times, and definitely it resonates with me, and it feels more current than perhaps it is, and maybe there's an insight in that, but I also find it eye-opening that the reference point for what effective and creative B2B work looks like is 10 years ago. If I ask you that question in a B2C context, you'd probably have work from last year, the year before, so why do you think we don't see more of it?
I think a couple of reasons. I think there is a really strong in B2B gravitational pull towards stuff that feels sensible and grown up, because we tend to think of business customers as
rational
serious,
beings.
Rational and serious. I mean, I remember when I was the planner on the Vodafone business for many years here in New Zealand, and I can remember really struggling with that business because they felt that if they did something that was really fun in the consumer space, it would turn the business customers off. They would sort of see some like fun, seemingly frivolous, consumer piece of advertising, and they'd think, well, that's not a serious enough company for me. And that was a really pervasive belief at Vodafone. They always had to watch sort of how fun they got on the consumer side, because they might turn off the business customers, and all of the sort of the enterprise sales guys and all that were all very nervous about and so anyway, I went and looked at their sort of numbers, because they track B2C and B2B brand health, and they track their market share in those areas and all that sort of stuff. And when we did the most creative consumer stuff, the business brand improved.
So there was this halo effect, this kind of gravitational pull from one to the other.
It was just this belief that if they did something fun, business people would not think this. It's not based in any data or any kind of, it wasn't based in any empirical kind of analysis or observation. It was just this kind of feeling that people had that we need to be grown up and serious. And it's just not true. We don't. Business people are people, and of course, in our dealings with them, we need to be professional. But the brand can be great fun, and I think what we do with our own B2B brands like Tracksuit. I mean, Tracksuit's a ball. It's loads of fun, and where before market research was very dry and very serious, right? And so I think that's one big reason in B2B. I think the second thing is like B2B probably doesn't have quite as much money in the system.
Spend is
there's not as many chances for shots on goal. So I think that's probably one reason. And I think marketing in B2B is seen often more as a sales enablement function than it is seen as a brand building function. And if you're there just to focus on the sales end of things, you're not going to end up doing the sorts of work that really kind of builds the brand and really engages people. And so, I think those are probably the main reasons. But I think it's also changing. I mean, you mentioned John and Pete, and they've done a great job of kind of really advocating for B2B marketing, thinking in the same way as consumer marketing. And in fact, all of us kind of effectiveness experts from around the world have worked with the B2B Institute back when John and Pete were there, to replicate the analysis we've done in B2C, with B2B data. And we've proven like all of the principles from the IPA, from the Ehrenberg Bass Institute, the work that I've done, they all play out just the same in B2B. Like there is no difference, right? The way that brands are built is exactly the same in B2B as it is in B2C. And so I think people are beginning to come around to that idea, and hopefully that'll just, the snowball will keep building.
Yeah. I think there's definitely on the marketer side of that equation, there is definitely appetite there. We have a lot of conversations with marketers across the country who they're almost stymied by this business culture, like you said at Vodafone, of you can't take too many risks. Let's not say that. We'll piss off that key account. So there's appetite there on the marketer side, but on the business side of the equation, there's still that resistance. There's still that reluctance. I mean, from an effectiveness perspective, you're able to basically make a financial argument for doing it, right? For taking that creative path, for building future demand, for focusing on that side of the coin. What would your advice be to a B2B marketer here in New Zealand who knows that they need to stop focusing just on that Google Ads bottom of funnel CPC, CTR space, and actually grow the bigger slice of the pie, grow the whole pie?
Yeah, totally. It's, the reason that I wrote Future Demand was very much for startup founders and venture capital people. And startups aren't all B2B, but lots of them are, right?
Yep.
And venture capitalists it's a B2B business. And so they had these sort of ideas about marketing and brand building being sort of, brand building being something that big stupid companies use to sort of, con people into buying their crap products, right? And certainly this sort of, this tech startup world had really grown up believing if you build a great product, people will come, and we don't need to make up for it with brand.
The tax that we have to pay.
Yeah, exactly. And again, that's not true. We've sort of proven that out. Like, it's B2B brands, if they want to, really get to scale, they do need to build their brands. And anyway, like the idea in Future Demand is really, what I tried to do is provide an explanation of why brand building is important that people could share with others, that made sense as a mental model in the way that this very fluffy idea of brand, doesn't make great sense. And the idea in the book is a really, really basic, simple one, which is that in any market there are two types of demand. There's what I call existing demand, which are people that are in the market right now and ready to buy. And then there's a much larger group of people who are not in the market yet, but will come into it in future. And so often when I talk at conferences, I say, put up your hand if you're right now in the process of buying a new smartphone. One or two hands go up. Put up your hand if you think you'll buy a new smartphone in the next 2 years. Everyone's hand goes up. And that's just a sort of, that's to illustrate that, in any market, there's a small group who are in the market and wanting to buy right now, and a much larger group who will come into the market later. And marketing has a really different job to do with those two groups of people, right? So for those that are in the market and ready to buy, they actually do want information, like rational information. They want features and benefits and price and where can I get it and calls to action and all that kind of stuff is absolutely relevant to those people. And it's absolutely irrelevant to that much larger group of people. Because when you're not in the market for something, you're not going to take the time out of your day to learn about the features and benefits of products that you're not intending to buy until later, right? And this is the same in B2B as it is in B2C. So the Aaron Big Bass Institute did a piece of work where the outcome was that in B2B categories, about 5% of customers, buyers, are in the category at any kind of given quarter. And 95% of them aren't, right? So how we market to those two groups is really different. If we're talking to those people who are going to come into the category later, we need to do something interesting enough to earn their attention, right? So all of us that will never buy a commercial truck but watch the Jean-Claude Van Damme spot, right? Why did we do that? That doesn't make any sense. We'll never buy a truck. Why would we watch an ad for a truck? But we watched it because it was this really engaging idea that meant that it sort of earned its way into our attention. And that's what we need to do as marketers in both B2B and B2C. We need to talk to that much larger group of people who will come into the market later, and we need to do the sort of work that earns their attention because it's creative and it's emotional. It's not seeking to drive like a sale. It's seeking to leave a positive memory. So when those people come into the category later on, they gravitate towards us and they respond better to our sales activity or our performance marketing activity or what have you. And that's a real kind of thing about human nature. When we come into a category, we gravitate towards what we're familiar with or what we feel good about because we have an inbuilt familiarity bias, all of us, that sits in our reptilian brain, and it drags us subconsciously towards things that we are familiar with. And so the more familiar we make our brand among those people who will come into the category next year, the more familiar the more we do that job now, the more likely they are to say yes to the sale in a year's time. And so that's basically the principle. And it works exactly the same in B2B as it does in B2C.
I really like that concept, the way that you frame that piece there about you're not even going to buy a Volvo truck. I mean, unless you've got cash to burn and you want to go and have some fun on a road trip. But the fact that the work was enough to engage you, to engage me, to engage producer Louis, it sets a really interesting yardstick for the level of work that you produce and the creativity behind it. But if we dial back to that startup space, and like you said, in the B2B startup space, where let's face it, everyone's watching the bank account, like the dollars really, really matter in launch mode. How do you overcome that sense that there's wastage in doing that? That you're going to spend a bunch of money creating something that's so whiz-bang that a bunch of non-customers are paying attention to it.
I mean, wastage is a really interesting concept. So let's think about it. If we're paying money to reach lots of people who are never going to buy from our category, then that, of course, is wasteful.
There's a German word for that, Streuverlust.
Right.
And it literally means like paid overspill.
Right. Oh, interesting. All right, good. Well, if we do that, that's obviously quite wasteful. If we're talking to a bunch of people who aren't in the category but will come in later, that's not at all wasteful, right? If we do a campaign, and I think this is something that people kind of obsess unnecessarily about, if we do a campaign that reaches lots of our in-market customers, lots of our out-of-market customers, and also a bunch of others who'll never buy from the category. That doesn't matter. It's just the cost of doing business. It doesn't, we should be more focused on, are we reaching the people that are in our category? And it sort of doesn't matter if we happen to also reach a bunch of other people. There's no way of reducing that or making that more efficient. And so I think, we shouldn't obsess kind of, or worry too much about that. I think in the early days, if you're in sort of year one of a new business, what the data says is it actually is better to sort of, wait towards the short term, wait towards doing performance marketing and sales stuff and all of that. But as we go past that sort of first year, it becomes increasingly important to build our brand among those people that have come into the category later, so we can continue to sort of grow. What we've seen in the data is this very common pattern of businesses starting up, going really, really well, thanks to a great sales process, great performance marketing, great sales enablement, all of that kind of stuff, but then plateauing out. It's very, very common in the BC world. They say it all the time. They're really confused about why it happens, and the reality is, for a business to continue making sales as efficiently as it did in the early years, it needs to scale its brand awareness at the same time as it scales its spend on salespeople and performance marketing and those sorts of more short-term things. The two things there are equally important, and they need to be done together in order to drive a sort of sustainable long-term. And the argument I'd say about it being sort of wasteful in year one, I think if you don't intend to be in business after year three, it's fine, then don't waste money on it. If you hope to still be in business like later on, like in year 5 or year 10, which is usually where, you're starting to create proper value, you need to be investing in that stuff in year 1, and year 2 and year 3, so it's an investment. It's not a wasteful cost. It's an investment in making sure that the business grows into the future in a way that generates lots of value.
It's so interesting. We had very, very early on in our podcast journey, Brandon from Henry, down in Wellington on the show. And Brandon is a personal friend of mine, but he came very much from a performance background. He was a SEO expert, all of that stuff. Yeah. And that got them to a point. And then all of a sudden they realized that they couldn't acquire more customers within their efficient range. And they're like, oh shit, we need to actually create more demand. We're just capturing what's there. And that for him was this really uncomfortable journey of doing stuff that's like not generating a return today, which is an uncomfortable space for a lot of people who've come up through that pure digital space, right? Yeah.
Absolutely. But it's a lot like investing money, right? Why would I put all of that money into an investment when I could just spend it on myself now? Well, why? Because the value of that's going to compound over time, and you're going to end up with lots more money, right? And it's just the same with marketing. Your brand building is just the same as investment. You invest and you see those compounding effects come in over time, and it's kind of, I know it's boring not to see them all come in the first 3 months, but just like investing, we don't see all of the returns come in tomorrow, right? We know that it takes some time for that. So we really have to have that mindset. And I think, the smart ones do, right? And this is, maybe it's just Darwinian, right? The smart businesses do understand this. And so if you want to be a smart business that is competitive in 10 years' time, this is one of the things that that you need to be thinking about.
Yeah, I really like that analogy of the compound interest. It was one of the headlines that came out of that recent podcast from the Uncensored CMO with Prof. Scott Galloway. And the whole thing was talking about the compound interest of the decisions that you make along the way. And whether that's on a personal level, or whether it's from a marketing perspective. It's what I like about that as well is that it's also a language. It's a financial language. And that's one of the things that marketers can sometimes struggle with is making that CFO friendly argument for what they're doing and why.
Yeah, the other one I use is that, let's say you have a plot of land and you want to generate income off that land. What you could do if you wanted to generate income really fast, is you could quickly knock up kind of a small building, and you could start charging rent for it, and you would make income very quickly, but at a very small amount. Or you could spend 18 months building a high rise, and you wouldn't get any money for the first 18 months, but then you get tons after that, right? So that's the trade-off, right? Do we want a small amount of money in now, or do we want lots of money in later? And of course, we kind of need both in business, right? So there's always, these two things are both important. The short-term kind of sales activation, performance marketing stuff is really important, but it's only half of it. And the long-term is really important too. So, build a little shack, but make sure you're building the skyrise at the,
out the back.
At the same time, because otherwise you're just always going to be in a shack, and that's going to be shit, isn't it?
Step out of the shack. Yeah, I love that. Now, look, we're, believe it or not, somehow 35 minutes into this conversation. I'm conscious of your time, but I do want to ask one sort of, I suppose, closing thought here is, what are the things that marketers should go out and consume and learn, other than your books and the Master of Advertising Effectiveness? Absolutely do that. Good plug. What else? What should we be consuming?
Well, I think there's probably a couple of answers to that. One is sort of in terms of consuming like best practice stuff, right? The work of the IPA in the UK, the work of the Ehrenberg Bass Institute, the work of the LinkedIn B2B Institute. These are all good sources of reliable, robust information on how marketing kind of really works. So I think really digging into all of that, and remembering that most of what gets taught at marketing school. And I was talking to someone in the US who had recently been in a pretty good college MBA marketing program, and he described what he'd been taught, and it's amazing because most of what they talk has been debunked, like completely debunked.
Okay, interesting.
And so, they talk a lot in marketing school and in MBAs about loyalty marketing and how important it is to drive loyalty. It's been proven 6 ways to Sunday that loyalty is just a factor of the category. You can't, marketing can't meaningfully change loyalty rates. And even if you do, it doesn't produce that much of a return. Whereas marketing can very much increase penetration rates. And that's a far faster way and safer and better way to grow. So I think being cautious of the kind of the old wisdom of marketing, or what's being taught in schools, because it's only been the last 15 years that we've really had access to all of this data to figure out how it really works. And it works really differently to how it's taught in schools. Then I think the other side of it is, it's sort of knowing your stuff is one bit, but then sort of being inspired is the other bit as a marketer, I think. Understanding kind of human nature and culture and how people work, and behavioral science is a really kind of cool field where you get to understand how people make decisions and why they make decisions, and use a lot of that. And again, even in B2B, we primarily make decisions with our based on how we feel, based on our emotions, which are then post-rationalized by our kind of rational brain. And that's just as true in B2B as it is in B2C, even though we are sure that it's not true in B2B because we're all making very rational decisions in B2B. And it's not true. And so I think kind of understanding how decision making happens is a really useful thing for marketers to do. Understanding culture. I just read a great book by a new friend of mine, Dr. Marcus Collins, who wrote a book called For the Culture, and it talks about sort of just how important and how predictive the cultures we subscribe to are of our behavior, as opposed to our demographics or our psychographics or those sorts of things. So culture is a really interesting one. Beyond that, I don't know, approach the world with open eyes and open ears and notice interesting things and have fun with it.
Yeah. I said that was going to be my last question, but I can't resist asking this one. everything within marketing relies upon something being scarce or something being finite. There's only so much attention in the market. There's only so much ad spend. There's only so much reach that's there and that's viable. What happens when everyone is following current best practice in 15 years' time? Does the pendulum swing the opposite way?
Yeah, it's really interesting because that is a really great point, that marketing stops working when everyone starts doing the same thing, right? So the principles that we as an effectiveness community talk about is less about making the marketing content and ideas the same, and more about like getting the budgeting right. We know how much we need to spend to grow now. We've done all that analysis, and you can set budgets in a way that underpin growth, and there'll always be underspending competitors in 10 years, 50 years, 100 years, and so that's one. This idea of sort of targeting and loyalty versus penetration, do we tightly target the people that are in them, that are already our customers, or do we go and speak to the whole market? That principle, by the way, it's the latter that drives growth, and that will always be kind of true. And then this sort of ideas around existing demand and future demand, that will always be true. Now, what we do with those principles when it comes to creating the actual marketing, so creating the strategy and creating the creative idea, that if we end up all doing the same thing, we'll get worse and worse and worse. So we need to be constantly looking for the next thing. So still obeying those principles, but then using creativity and strategy to find new ways and new ways to engage and persuade people as we go on. And so that will kind of never stop. I mean, I think, we're having all these conversations in the industry about AI. I think, AI will replace almost all of what we know as performance marketing, and almost none of what we know as brand building. Because performance marketing, you can absolutely, it's the right thing to do is to be pretty rational, functional, list out, give people information, the right people at the right time, and you can automate all of that. Driving future demand requires surprising people, engaging people, doing things that it's very, very difficult for AI to sort of come up with these sorts of ideas, right? We're just much better at that. So as long as we keep doing, as long as we keep using our human brains and our human creativity, then we can continue to excel. So yeah, there are some principles which are more structural, and then there's creativity, which is more kind of, we need to be doing it differently every time.
And I kind of have to end that podcast on the phrase, use your human creativity, because you'll always be better at that than AI. I think that's a perfect place to wrap up the conversation. Hey, James, look, honestly, thank you so much. It's been an absolute pleasure. I could have gone on I've got more and more questions that I want to ask you, but we don't have the time for it. But look, thank you so much. Really, really appreciate you coming on the show and sharing your wisdom.
You're welcome. Thanks for having me.
That's that. Thanks for listening to We Do B2B by Blue Ocean. Now, brace for CTAs. If you want to join and grow the community, make sure to subscribe wherever your eyes and ears absorb information. Don't forget to switch on notifications so you know when the latest episodes drop. And for more B2B goodness, be sure to follow Blue Ocean, the B2B agency, on LinkedIn. Now look, you know how this next piece works. The more reviews we get, the faster this thing grows. So please do for us what you'd hope your customers would do for you. Leave a review and share your thoughts. Let's stay connected and keep the B2B marketing conversation going.